If you get power outages regularly, you're going to want to watch this video. Today I'm going to be talking about all the things you need to know about house backup with or without solar panels, including this SigEnergy SigenStor kit there behind me and referral also to the Powerwall 3. Let's go. Home batteries in the UK are becoming so much more popular, and they're becoming more popular because power outages are happening more regularly. Let's just look in the news recently and we've seen the fact that we've got Portugal and Spain that had a nationwide blackout. If you're based in the countryside and you're more rural, you may well be prone to more blackouts, and you might be thinking, I need to get a system put in place. There is definitely a significant rise in the number of people going for home battery storage solutions like the one behind me. Home battery storage is becoming much more common in the UK for one of three reasons. Charging up on cheap nighttime tariff for those on battery only, for those with solar panels, making the most of energy generation on their roof and storing that into battery storage. And the main one that I'm going to be talking about today is whole house backup. This is where if your power goes out, well, it doesn't anymore because you have a kit to be able to compensate for it. Now, traditionally, the most common type of systems when we first started installing this was for those properties a little bit more rural, where they would be prone to regular blackouts. However, there have been many more use cases now for this type of system. The SigEnergy kit behind me has a 0 milliseconds latency. So what I've found is more people with things like medical devices, for example, that just want that extra peace of mind of security. Things like medical beds, for example, in the home, where people want to live in their homes a little bit longer. They want that, again, that energy security. We also get where they've got electric gates, CCTV systems, perhaps like slightly larger properties where they're thinking, if a criminal comes and cuts the cable that comes into my house, all these systems effectively completely stop. Whereas if you have one of these kits, effectively you're in a position whereby instantaneously they can back the whole system up so you can stay grid independent should the worst case scenario happen and your power cuts out. Let me break down a little bit more for you in terms of how these now work and operate. So let me start by walking through the kit that's behind me so you get an idea of what these parts are and what they have to play in the equation. Now, first of all, inverters and battery storage can be installed with or without a gateway. And that's the part that's above the gateway at the top, and that's what does the whole house backup. But for context, let me start by explaining. We've got this at the top. This is the SigEnergy SigenStor energy controller. It's available in different sizes. So most people don't realize you can get house backup for both single phase and 3-phase installations too. So if you are a bigger property, it's very much possible to back those supply up as well. So this is essentially an inverter. This takes power from the grid, converts it to DC and store it in the battery packs, which is what I've got below there. Or it can take the usable energy generation that your solar panels are generating, if you have solar panels installed, and can convert that to store that in the battery storage as well. This brings me nicely onto the gateway, which is this here. Most people don't realize they're actually quite big in terms of physical surface size. If you look at me versus this, you do need to make space for these. These can go both inside and they can go outside as well. What you've got in here is a series of technical devices, but in simple terms, it's a thing called a contactor. Using electronics, this monitors what the grid's doing at all times, and if the grid has a problem with frequency, has a voltage drop, for example, or the power just cuts off completely, the contactor kicks in, think of it like a really big switch, switches over so that effectively the inverter now becomes your source of power, draws it up then through into your distribution board. Now bear in mind, the amount of battery storage you have installed has an intrinsic link to the length of time you can stay off grid. If your solar panels are wired directly into the side of the inverter, then you may well be in a position that if the sun comes out and your battery is running low, it can top it up as we go. One of the great features of the SigEnergy SigenStor is the fact that we can use a third-party generator, so a diesel generator. I know we don't want to think of, burning dinosaurs on this channel, but if you are much more rural or you're in a position where you need longer stages of backup, you have a limitation on your battery storage, you're thinking, I might need to go further than that, 1, 2, 3 days. It is very possible to link these with a generator. When the battery gets to a certain reservation level, effectively the generator can kick in and top the battery storage back in, up again, and turn itself off. It's a great bit of kit, and that's all available with the SigEnergy kit. So you can set up these gateways in a couple of different ways. First of all, Victron was well known, which is a brand and manufacturer for completely off-grid systems on things like barge boats, for example. SigEnergy can actually be completely off-grid if you need it to do so. Most of the time that's not very practical, because sometimes in the winter, even if you've got it linked with solar panels, you might not be quite generating enough. But you can essentially have completely off-grid, or you can have like the Powerwall 3, for example, where it's designed for short periods of time off-grid. Technically, you could probably put one of these off-grid for a longer period of time, but they're effectively not designed at the outset for that application, if that makes sense. So these gateways and other types of inverters, some inverters just come with like an EPS output, which stands for emergency power supply. These can often be limited in the number of circuits that they back up. The Home Max gateway, which is the one I've got behind me, is capable of backing up the entire house. So effectively, if you have a problem with the power coming into the Home Max gateway can pick this up, make a changeover to your inverter and battery stack as being the source of supply, and you're in a position where you essentially don't notice the difference in terms of your day-to-day usage. Just be careful, however, because the inverter size may well limit the amount of supply that you can have. So for example, if I have a 5 kilowatt inverter and I turn on a kettle, a toaster, a washing machine, a dryer and my heat pump, you could easily overload the system in the event of an off-grid outage, and you may well be in a position where your system shuts down. So one thing you want to be asking your installer is my inverter big enough, and do I have enough battery stacks in order to be able to meet the demand and supply that I need for the length of time that I need it. Other solutions than SigEnergy, like the Powerwall 3, for example, has a set battery size of 13.5 kilowatt hours, and in the mobile app, you can just set the amount that you want sat in reserve at any point in time. Powerwall 3, a great feature is the fact that it can link in with the Met Office and look at red and yellow weather warnings. So in the event that there's a higher risk of an outage, the actual units can force charge themselves to be prepared for off-grid functionality. So do kind of get into the weeds a little bit in terms of the functionality that you want and the reason why you want it backing up. Last thing you want is you want the heating on, you want your heat pump to be supplied, or you want a particular set of medical device or certain loads to be backed up. It's not been well considered. Someone's just simply put the system in place and you find your inverter isn't big enough. We don't have enough battery storage for that. That'd be a nightmare if you had a security system and you were hoping it would go off grid and eventually it doesn't. So we can set it up in a couple of different ways when we do battery storage. So it is possible if you can't have solar panels, just to set it up as battery storage only with a gateway. Effectively, you can use energy on an off-peak rate to charge the battery storage up, or you can simply just leave the battery storage in reserve with a full pack ready to go for any grid outages. That's one potential option that we've got in place. The next potential option is linking this system directly with solar on a hybrid basis. It would still be the same controller and battery modules. Effectively, in that scenario, you would just wire your solar panels directly into the side of the inverter. It's also possible to link other sources of generation. So if you are a little bit more rural in this scenario, or if you've got other renewable technologies at home, it is possible to link these systems with them. For example, wind turbines, hydroelectric. We recently did a system alongside a hydroelectric system whereby it could track what that inverter was doing and use that for storage too. So if you are prone to power cuts, you're in a position where you don't just have to rely upon battery storage or solar panels, you can also rely upon alternative sources of generation to almost provide a mix. You could add a diesel generator alongside that as well, almost like as a combination to keep yourself off grid for much longer if those power cuts are longer in nature. There's essentially things we can do to engineer around it. Most of the time when we spec battery storage, it's just for energy savings. But if you're thinking, I need some redundant capacities in the event I go off grid, not only do I want to make these savings, but I also need enough of a capacity to keep me off grid for a period in time. I think the first thing you need to look at is how long do you need to be able to stay off grid for? Most people just need it for a level of thinking time. So if you've got a security system, for example, it's enough for you to be able to get out of the electric gates, to be able to shut systems down safely. If you have IT equipment, for example, it can be the same scenario. It can be enough to book yourself just a hotel, pack your stuff up with the lights on, finish your evening's worth of entertainment. Your other scenarios whereby people go, well, look, we can have regular power cuts that could last for a day or 2 days, and these quite happen quite regularly. Trust me, it really can happen, and there are people out there where this is the scenario that counts for them. So I think, first of all, you want to look in terms of capacity at the amount that you want to make in savings. So this would be getting your annual energy usage, dividing it by 365, That gives you the amount of total capacity we would look at, roughly speaking, within the battery storage for a 24-hour period. If you want backup, what we've got to look at is how many hours would we like to sit in reserve? What does that look like? Bear in mind, when you're sat in reserve, often you'll be in a position where you'll start to cut back. You're not going to turn on absolutely every light everywhere. You're going to start stripping your loads back. So often, let's say I use 10 kilowatt hours a day, a 10 kilowatt hour battery when you're off grid might last as long as 2 days because you're going to be a little bit more careful with the supply. But ultimately, what you need to work out is how long do you want this system to be capable of keeping you off grid? You're then in a position where we can look at the actual battery storage size. Sorry, I can't give you a more exact answer. It is a bit wishy-washy. That's because it's very case specific. You need to discuss that with your design engineer, and then you can spec the appropriate amount of battery storage. My point to make here is you don't want to buy battery storage you're not going to use, but equally, you don't want to think you've got a backup system in place and then effectively it tries to kick in and there's just not enough capacity there or enough inverting capacity to meet the demand that you're looking to meet. One of the new technologies that's really going to become apparent within off-grid systems is the ability to be able to do V2X, which is essentially taking power from your car and using that either to supply the grid or in this scenario, supply your home. So in theory, what you could do is get your car on a bi-directional EV charger, which is essentially a module that sits within the battery storage stack on the SigEnergy kit. You can plug that into your car, and instead of having to have endless stacks of batteries to meet long-term power outage, you can effectively plug your car in, use the power from your car, and if you needed more, you'd be in a position where you could drive to your local town or drive to your local city, charge the car back up again, drive it back home, and think of it literally being like I've run out of water. You can literally ship it into your home and use it that way. Now, V2X or vehicle to grid, vehicle to home is a very new technology. It's very limited to the number of cars. The actual charger itself is quite expensive. You know, you're talking like 2.5 grand plus, depending on the actual final model you get. But I think over time, what we'll find is that the chargers become more and more commoditized. They become much more readily available, and this technology will just become a thing. It will just be the standard that your car will look to meet either sweeping grid demands or will look to meet changes in your home demand without racking up the costs in terms of massive amounts of battery storage for long-term power outages. So that brings me nicely on to cost and different brands that are available. Like anything, there's always a product range, whether we have it in cars from Dacia through to Rolls-Royce. It's very similar within the battery storage industry. Clearly, if you're having regular power outages, you want something that can respond quite quickly to a power outage. Cheaper systems have limited functionality, so just be careful when cutting cost. But sometimes if you are on a limited budget, there might be alternative products that are out there. So if you kind of think Give Energy, you're just about to bring in their all-in-one version 2, I've actually done a video. I don't know whether it'll be out before then or afterwards, but if you follow the channel, you'll be able to find out one way or the other. And then what we have is like the SigEnergy SigenStor, which probably sandwich itself somewhere between there and the Powerwall, which I would say is kind of like top spec, and you're paying a little bit more for the actual product. I think if you're getting irregular power cuts, then something like the SigEnergy SigenStor will be bang on, strikes a nice middle ground. Whereas I think if you're regularly getting power outages and power cuts, then you might want to lean more towards either the high-end inverters on the SigEnergy SigenStor range, so go a little bit bigger with the kit, or go for the Powerwall 3 by Tesla Energy. Now, when it comes to gateways, whenever we wire an inverter into a house, we have to wire it into a fuse board, whether that be an existing one that's at your home or whether that's one that we install, because ultimately we need to be able to meet current standards when we do that. We don't need to install a mains board when we install a gateway. We can normally wire the inverter and loads to the gateway. Think of it a bit like a fuse board at the bottom with a fancy contactor switch, as I mentioned earlier on. There's a bit more to it than that, but if I just keep it simple for the moment. These are about £1,000 fully fitted. I know there's some businesses out there that are saying, we'll give you a free gateway. SigEnergy don't have any offers on free gateways at presently stand. That will just be factored into the margins of the quote that you're seeing. So just be careful, look at the bottom line whenever you're looking at quotes and comparing, and make sure that we're not cutting costs somewhere by way of fitting a small inverter because it looks fancier from a price perspective, and actually you're not buying the right amount of capacity that you physically need to meet your demands when you go off grid. So there's a couple of rules of thumb in terms of battery storage size. I mentioned earlier in terms of the capacity, just be cautious around big heavy loads, things like heat pumps, swimming pool pumps, hot tubs, sometimes if you've got house backup, unless you genuinely want these to continue working on in the event of a power outage, if you're in the middle of the night, Sod's Law says it's midnight that it goes out, you're fast asleep, if your heat pump's whirring away all night and you've got a limited amount of battery storage, you could find out that your power goes out a few hours later and you've not had the opportunity to react. This is where, in the gateway, we can essentially wire essential and what's called a non-essential load. So an essential load backs up in the event of a power outage, a non-essential load basically turns it off. We have the option to select between loads, so don't be scared of asking your engineer saying, look, I'm a bit bothered in the middle of the night, this kit kicks out, I want it to back up my medical equipment, I'm less fussed about the hot tub that I've got outside. You can select between circuits, or you can simply blindly have the system back the whole house up, but just be aware of battery drain, because you need to be given the opportunity in time to be able to react to that to reduce the load if you go off grid. Most of the apps will give you an automated prompt, so like the Powerwall, for example, in the top left-hand corner will just estimate the amount of time that you've got left off-grid. If you reduce your energy consumption, that estimation will change as you go. Something else just to note is latency behind the actual gateways. So this is the amount of time it takes for this contactor, big switch, to be able to switch from the grid to your home supply. SigEnergy promote a 0 milliseconds latency. What that means is if you literally cut the cable coming into your home, the SigEnergy Home Pro Max gateway, which is what's behind me, can pick it up, send the information to the inverter, and the whole changeover happens instantaneously. There is no delay, no lights flicker, no cooker clock resets itself, no alarm goes off. Whereas your Powerwall 3 by Tesla Energy has an extremely fast changeover, but it's a couple of milliseconds. Sometimes this can mean changing over the clocks. It can sometimes mean an alarm going off, for example. I mean, it's a real first world problem, but it can be a bit annoying in the middle of the night. And it's something that when we kind of go into the weeds with this stuff, that I know that most people are really interested in, because they think, I've got a security system, I don't want my gates randomly opening at night. I also don't want, it's all about risk. I don't want my CCTV momentary blipping off and all of a sudden I'm not recording this, because in the event you've got like a criminal on your property, you want to make sure that it's really, really slick. And not for 1 second slating Powerwall 3, I think it's a fantastic bit of kit and we install lots of them, but if this is something that's really important to you, you have to get really into the weeds and look at the granular data to know what you're backing up, how long you want to back it up for, and then we can work out which product we want to back it up with, depending on the budget you want to spend. So one really important thing to take away from this is, well, that's the universe giving us a sign, isn't it? Like and subscribe. Look how fast I did that one there, eh?